Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. For those who don't know me yet, I'm Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans, and I started practicing mindfulness and insight meditation in 1998 during a time when my life came to a crashing halt. I had dealt with the fallout from a trauma. One of the gifts it left me with was panic disorder. And after a number of years denying and distracting myself from trauma, panic, so forth, that all ended up blowing up in my face because it turns out denial and distraction aren't sustainable strategies for dealing with such things. They work great until they don't. And for me, when they stopped working, everything came crashing down. I ended up being diagnosed with clinical anxiety, depression, panic disorder, of course, agoraphobia. I couldn't leave my house. I ended up being paired up with a psychologist who was already several decades deep into teaching and practicing mindfulness and insight meditation. He offered this to me as a way to work with my issues, and I was unimpressed. I was unable to leave my house. I was unable to work. And he was talking about, hey, let's watch this breathing. I decided I would do it just long enough so that I could come back to him and say, look, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? Almost 25 years later, I haven't had that conversation with him, and now I'm teaching. Draw your own conclusions. So here I am, and here we are. This is part 2 of a short series that I do on anger. Part 1 was a couple of weeks ago. Not necessary to have been here for part 1 to follow part 2. I'll make some references to it. I'm starting to record some of these, so if you missed the last one, it will eventually be out there and you can catch up on it. One of the things that I did talk about in the first one was the interesting language that we have around anger. That first session was called From Blind Rage to Clear Seeing. And it's interesting, the language that we have around things. Blind rage, seeing red. When we develop tunnel vision, these things that we associate with anger, when we talk about anger. And I was thinking about that again as I was working on my notes for today's session, which is anger's honeyed crest and poison root. Those are not my terms. This comes from the Buddha. These practices that I teach come from the historical Buddha from 2,500 years ago. And in one of his sutras, he discusses anger and refers to it as having a honeyed crest, or what's sometimes translated as a sweet sting, and a poison root. So what do we mean by this? Towards the end of our last session, we were talking about the distinction between saying that we shouldn't welcome anger versus anger being unwelcome. A subtle difference, but there's a critical distinction there. One is how we are dealing with it. The other is we're ascribing a property to it. There's a difference between saying that is unwelcome and simply saying, oh, this is here. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily welcoming it. Saying, oh, it's good that it's here. While still not saying, we're not saying it's not here. Not saying, oh, great, it's here. But sometimes, as we were discussing and one participant mentioned, sometimes we do welcome anger. For some of us, very often we welcome anger. And why do we do this? This is where we get into this honeyed crest, this sweet sting. Because as we discussed last time, there is a function to anger. Anger is not inherently good or bad, despite what some spiritual circles may advise. I disagree with, oh, anger's bad, shouldn't feel anger. I've been down the denial road. That doesn't end well. Didn't for me anyway. There is a function to anger. Anger, historically, evolutionarily, is intended to give us that burst of energy that allows us to gain or regain control in the face of a threat. It's for survival. It's part of fight or flight. It's the fight part. And here's the thing. Anger feels better than the fear that it's usually protecting. And it's not even necessarily a related fear. I'll give you an example. When I was in college, I had some semesters when I was at school where my life in general had kind of gone to shit. This was during the time when I was in my denial and distraction days. So there were some semesters when life had gone to shit, and there were some semesters where everything was kind of fine. Everything in life was, school, relationships, job, whatever. Stuff was okay. No big day-to-day problems to deal with. Well, guess which semesters I ended up having more issues with panic? The ones where everything was fine. When things were going to shit, I could be upset about something. I could be angry about something. And that really crowded out those fearful voices, those panic voices. What if your heart rate gets too fast? What if your breathing gets too fast? What if you start to have a meltdown? Didn't have time for that. No. What about this stuff that's pissing me off, right? And in fact, that's how my meltdown almost 25 years ago happened. My life in general had gotten to a place where there was really nothing making me angry anymore. I didn't have that fuel for anger, if you will. The various parts of my life all at once came together in such a way that I didn't have anything to get angry about. And that's when I fell apart. Because all the anxieties, all the panic, all the fallout from the trauma, which had 8 years to fester as I was suppressing it, came to the forefront. And my strategy for dealing with it was gone. And yeah, I had to face it at that point. And it's not just that the energy of the anger feels better than whatever it might be crowding out. It also provides this feeling of focus. For those of you who saw, Revenge of the Sith, and saw when Anakin Skywalker was starting to fall to the dark side and become Darth Vader, one of the things the Emperor, the Emperor-to-be, says to him is, I can feel your anger. It gives you focus. And this feeling of focus is pleasant. We usually like feeling focused. But here's the thing. I often make reference to this internal round table that we all have, like we're leading a meeting of all the little voices inside of us that are saying, oh, you got to do this thing. Oh, you got to do that thing. You got to do that thing. Some of these voices represent anger. Some represent fear. Some represent joy. Some represent determination. Every one of these voices, of course, is us. And every one of these voices, even the ones that maybe we don't want to hear, every one of these voices is actually trying to help. The problem is they're trying to help from a very limited vantage point. And one of those voices is anger. And sometimes we fully identify just with that voice. And that has a sweet sting to it. Why is it sweet? Well, it's sweet because when we fully identify with that little voice, all the conflict that we're trying to sort out among all the other voices has receded to the background. We're not paying attention to that from the greater vantage point. We're fully identified with one voice. So there's no conflict. There's this feeling of unity, this feeling of focus. The problem, of course, is that we are wholly identified with a little voice that has a limited vantage point. So this isn't actually focus. It's a destructive form of hyperfocus. It's like if we went to water a large lawn and attempted to accomplish the task by dumping all of the water we were going to use on the lawn on one tiny spot, which really isn't going to help that tiny spot or the rest of the lawn. So this starts to bring us into the flip side of this honeyed crest, of this sweet sting. Now we start getting into the poison root. We talked last time about this distinction between power and force. Sometimes we confuse the two. Force is about control, trying to exert total control, which I've never found to work. Power is about making space. Power sustains. Force drains. Power attracts. Force repels. But there is a distinction between genuine power and false power. Anger feels powerful, but it is a false power. It shares more characteristics with force. How do I mean? We start by mistaking the energy of anger that I mentioned earlier as power because it feels so much better than whatever we are avoiding. It feels better than that other thing that we're feeling, or maybe that thing that we're afraid we might feel if we didn't have the anger there. It doesn't just have to be fear. It could be a generalized anxiety. It could be boredom. It could be boredom. Isn't it nice to feel energized, to feel some power, to feel a rush, rather than being bored? So we begin to substitute anger for these other things, much in the way that I did. We develop this association, not even at a conscious level, it's sort of a subconscious level. We develop this association. Oh, if I feel this, then I don't have to feel that. If I feel this, I don't have to feel that. Again, like that round table. If I wholly identify with that one voice, I don't have to worry about the conflict that I'm hearing when I have the greater vantage point and I'm listening to all the voices. So this starts to become automatic. We learn to use anger like a shield. And this can actually start to lead to what we would refer to in Buddhist terminology as craving. A craving or an attachment for anger. Now, as I mentioned, anger's function is to help us regain control in the face of a threat. It's meant to be used in the present moment. It's a discrete event. One and done. But it ends up being a tool that we can misuse when we start replaying these things in our mind that generate and maintain the anger, so that we have that relative feeling of power rather than dealing with that thing that is underlying. And this is really a form of force. It feels like power. It feels like power. But this is force. It's an attempt to control through avoidance, suppression. How do we know for sure that this is a form of force and not power? It drains. It drains our energy. And worse than that, it's actually corrosive to our physical and mental systems. We're generating a feeling of power, but at the cost of wearing down the system as a whole. A physical example of this is, imagine if you're feeling lethargic, tired, you want to feel some energy. There are a couple of ways you can go about this. You could start exercising. Now, it's difficult to start moving when you feel lethargic, but in my experience, if I'm feeling lethargic and can manage to start getting some movement in, some walking, treadmill, yoga, what have you, after about, 10, 15, 20 minutes, like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm moving, it generates a sustainable energy, a renewable energy. So you could do that. Or you could drink a couple of cups of coffee. That'll give you some energy. Now, again, how are you going to do an hour after that? That's not generative because it's not creating energy. It's simply releasing energy that you had in your storehouse. And once it's used up, it's gone. It's not renewable. It depletes. Power sustains. Force drains. So this replaying in our minds to keep generating this feeling that we find more pleasant than perhaps something else is one of the reasons why we focused our practice last time on physical sensation, so that we could interrupt the storylines that maintain and perpetuate the mind-body cycle, the one where we keep picturing that thing that made us angry, and then our body gets keyed up because our subconscious mind and body doesn't know the difference between something that's actually happening and something we're replaying in our minds. Right? I gave the example last time about one time years ago where I got cut off out on the road. And instead of generating the storylines that I used to do, like, oh, I'm going to go get that guy and what's his fucking problem and blah, 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 right? Instead of doing that, I came just to the felt experience and watched what happened in the body in the present moment. Again, that discrete one and done kind of thing, the way anger is really designed to work. Just looked at what it was doing instead of perpetuating a storyline, saw this incredible hot energy shooting through me, which I had never noticed before because usually I was up in the storylines, right? And then discovered that I just let it go. Like I didn't try to let it, like it just, I forgot about it. Something that normally would have kept me stewing for a few hours. I realized a few hours later, oh, that thing happened today, like this morning, didn't it? Like, wow, I forgot all about that. So we sever, if you will, that mind-body cycle so that we're not creating suffering for ourselves. I think the way I put it last time was if you get cut off out on the road like I did and you replay it in your mind 20 times afterward, well, as far as your mind and your subconscious mind and body are concerned, you didn't get cut off once, you got cut off 21 times. So we worked a little bit on creating a little bit of breathing room by breaking that cycle. What we're going to do today is take it a little bit further. Now that we've gained a little bit of breathing room, we can move to the next step. Last time, I talked a lot about simply asking the question, what is here? What is here? So we're not saying anger shouldn't be here. I shouldn't feel anger. We're not even necessarily saying anger is here. We're simply saying, what is here? And in the practice, the idea wasn't to generate anger just to be with it. This is stuff that we can use to work with anything that happens to be here in the present moment. Practicing with this with anything that happens to be here, positive or negative. That's a practice that translates and what I like to call generalizes, so that when we get used to working with that, with one emotion, with one state of mind, that's a skill that we are able to take to other emotions and states of mind. Like I often say, if you spend a number of years being a professional swimmer and then you want to take up jogging, you don't have to build up the stamina all over again. The stamina and energy and so forth that you've built up as a swimmer translates. It's the same thing here. It's the same thing here. So what we're going to move on to today, so we're going to go from just saying, what is here, to a little bit more of, why is it here? Or maybe even, why am I doing this? After all, we know anger is destructive, right? We wouldn't be here right now talking about this, listening about this, thinking about it, if there wasn't an issue here. So why do we do this? Why do we engage in this replaying, this misuse of the tool of anger? Why do we do that? Knowing the downsides. And the intellectual answer to this is, it's the same reason we do anything. We anticipate that we're going to get something out of it that is worth the effort we're putting into it. Transactional. It's going to get me something. Does it though? I don't think if the answer to that was yes, any of you would be here. I certainly wouldn't be talking about this. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the motivation? What's our motivation for generating and maintaining anger? And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about what we could say is an appropriate use of the tool of anger. That in the moment, one and done, hey, I need to get out of this bad situation, that kind of a thing. I'm talking about the stuff with the replaying, coming back to that thing again and again and again, and maintaining that hyper-focus, those destructive states of mind that wear down the mind and the body. Maybe years after the initial incident has passed. This is the stuff I'm talking about. This is the stuff I'm talking about. If we're doing that for years, or, weeks or days, hours, whatever, there's got to be a motivation there. We're doing it for a reason. Even if we've long forgotten because it's become so habituated over time, those associations have become so strong that our subconscious knows, that thing I don't want to think about's coming up. So let's do that other thing with the anger, that thing. Let's do that. And that's where this practice comes in. We're going to work with a technique that helps maybe shed a little light on where these things are coming from. So again, like last time, there's no need to generate anger or to try to remember. So you don't have to try to make yourself angry for the sake of this practice that we're going to do today. We're just going to begin incorporating a little bit more of the sort of mental, emotional components in addition to the physical ones that we did last time. But again, this all applies to whatever is here right now. So I invite you to bring this into whatever regular practice you might have or you might like to start. And the idea is, when those times come up, that a misuse of anger, an identification with just that one little voice, when those things happen, oh, hey, here's that thing I've been working on. Maybe give it a try here. And over time, some of these automatic associations that have been built up over the years and decades start to shift a little bit. I know mine certainly have. I don't think it's a coincidence that my anger issues over the years have, if not completely disappeared, damn near. And that hasn't come from working directly with anger, hardly at all. Most of my practice has focused on anxiety, some depression, a lot of panic, but the underlying issues that the anger was trying to protect me from, well-intentioned, but it just doesn't work well, not in the long term. So not only was I dealing with the actual underlying issues, but I was also developing the tools to do so, which meant two things. One, anger didn't really have much of a role anymore because the underlying stuff was being dealt with. And two, when anger does and did arise, the tools and techniques and habits that I had built for working with other things like anxiety and panic just naturally kicked in. So even in those times, which of course I still have like anybody else, a blind rage, a seeing red, a tunnel vision. In those times, the practice automatically kicks in. And that's what we're building here. Let's sit for a bit. One cue that I give before we begin is just to have your hips elevated higher than your knees, if possible. It's better for your posture, makes it easier for breathing. If that's not possible right now, not a big deal. Something to remember for next time, perhaps. I invite you to begin by imagining that you are suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of your head. As a cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. If you have some tension right now, that's fine. One of the forms of force, of control, is trying to force relaxation. I'm not quite sure how that's possible. You can't really force relaxation. If there's tension, we can simply notice that there is tension. If we do not bring tension to the tension by attempting to force it away, eventually it will leave on its own. Maybe today, maybe not. So we're sitting up reasonably straight. Any part of our body that is not holding us up can simply relax in its own time. And at the bottom, let's notice what's in contact with the floor or chair. Have that sense of grounding. We're being supported. Something is holding us up. So we have this grounding at the bottom and a lift at the top. And let's just take a moment and notice that, as well as the space in between. And if you haven't already, let's begin to incorporate some attention to our breathing. Notice that we don't have to control the breathing. we can consider that a form of force. We can use our power to simply make space to let the breathing be as it is. Our meditative breath is simply the one we are noticing exactly as it's playing out. Short or long, deep or shallow. Notice the in-breath, the out-breath, and the space in between. You may pick a particular body part where you're feeling the passage of air in and out, or you may watch each entire trajectory. And what I'd like you to do now is notice not just the physical sensation of the breathing, but the feeling about it. And when I say feeling, I'm talking about feeling in the Buddhist sense. Not feeling in terms of emotion, like happy and sad. Feeling simply as positive, negative, or neutral. Here's this breath right now that we are either not controlling, or perhaps we are still controlling and shaping it because maybe we've been doing that for a really long time. We're not sure how to stop yet. And that's fine. If that describes you, and it described me for a long time, if that describes you, it can be enough to simply notice, oh, this is what it feels like to try to control and shape the breathing. I've found it to be much more productive to simply notice that and see what it's like, rather than, again, trying to exert force or control over that control. So notice, however the breathing is right now, positive, negative, neutral. And that answer may change from breath to breath. Now, as we're sitting here making space, things will usually very quickly begin to fill that space. Thoughts, emotions. Can we expand this practice of noting the feelings, positive, negative, or neutral, to whatever comes up in our scope of awareness? What we're really doing here is working to get in touch with these feelings at a pre-verbal level. Why? Because it's at the verbal level that we generate our storylines. We write these scripts. Can we keep this at a really low level, really simple? This breath feels positive, negative, neutral. Oh, this thought just came up. It feels positive, negative, neutral. There's this emotion. Positive, negative, or neutral. Perhaps we do get caught up in a storyline, and then you suddenly catch it, or you hear my voice and realize, oh, I lost the breathing. And maybe that self-condemnation starts to kick in. Just notice, oh, is this positive, negative, or neutral? Not as a judgment call per se. Simply noticing the felt sense as it is. You may also do a body scan, and with each part of the body, notice, does this area feel positive, negative, or neutral? Coming back to the breathing or continuing to anchor on the breathing. The state of the body or the mind or emotions or some combination of them right now Positive, negative, or neutral? Now, the next step in this process, which you may want to try now, or you may keep in mind for the future. As you go through and notice sensations, thoughts, emotions, breathing, and you notice it as positive, negative, or neutral, I offer this question. How do you know? How do you know that's the feeling? How are you concluding that it's positive, negative, or neutral? Or perhaps to put it even a little more strongly, how are you deciding? One of my old yoga teachers often liked to tell us that the word decide, the origin of that word, means to cut off. When we decide something, we are removing an option from the table. So how are we deciding that a particular phenomenon, like a breath, an emotion, a sensation, a thought, how are we deciding? Positive, negative, or neutral? After all, the experience of anger and anxiety have a lot of common characteristics, physiologically and psychologically. How are we deciding, consciously or not, to apply one label to a collection of sensations and perceptions instead of another? And this isn't a leading question. This isn't me trying to say, oh, no, you think you're feeling anger, but you're really feeling this. No, it's not that. This is a face value question designed to open curiosity and inquiry into the process. All another way of saying the question we worked with last time. What is here? We spend so much of our lives trying to cover up, deny, avoid, get away from what is here. So we have to use some of these tricks to peel some of those layers back. What is here? And what's our role? What are we actually doing? in this process. We're not passive recipients of our experience. We try to shape things so they'll feel a little more pleasant. But we have to see, is that working? Maybe. Maybe sometimes. Which ones fall into the power category? Which ones fall into the force category? Well, we have to inquire, don't we? We have to use our discernment. We have to look at what we're doing. I'll close today's sitting with a short quote from Thanissaro Bhikkhu. When we meditate and lessen our greed, anger, and delusion, we learn how not to be overcome by our moods and emotions. We realize that we have tools to use so that the emotion is not just a given that we have to accept, but is instead something we can learn to work with. We learn how to reshape the present moment in a skillful way inside our minds. When we do this, we're not the only ones who benefit. The people we touch in our lives, touch with our thoughts, touch with our words, touch with our deeds, they benefit as well. Hi, Kainan. Yes.
Hi, Ron. How you doing?
Good. How you doing, my friend?
Good. Good to be back, and thank you for the session. It's always a breath of fresh air. When you mentioned anger and why we hold on to it and replay it in our minds, I feel like for me, I do that because when I replay it in my mind, somehow I'm getting the last word, and somehow that feels good, right? If I get the last word, then I feel like I'm right, you know?
Yeah. Isn't that funny how we'll keep replaying it again and again and again. It always kind of ends the same way, but we still have that fresh feeling of like, we just won the argument again. Yeah, that I definitely resonates. Yes.
Like how you can maybe go back in the past and change it, but you can't do that. So you want it in your mind. That's how I think about it.
Exactly. And that's where the suffering comes in, where we're taking this thing that only works in the present moment. That's what the anger energy is for. It's to help us survive in a present moment scenario. The saber-toothed tiger's coming to get us, That's not suffering. That's survival. That's its function. That's a use of the tool, if you will. It's that misuse where, we're trying to change the past. We're trying to control the future. And we keep spinning our wheels, writing those storylines, replaying those storylines. That's suffering. That's
Right.
suffering.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to root out here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers. Hi, Judy. Yes.
Yes, hello. I'm thinking today on the subject of anger, something I told a friend many years ago. When we have thought of something like it's 10 years ago, or it could be 40 years ago, and people say, I am so angry at someone because of some incident, and it happened so many years ago, and they're still carrying it around. Picture that the other person might very well have moved on. They're not at the same time as me thinking, oh, I'm just so angry, I can't let go of it, it's still here, all that stuff. But you are the one walking around with it, keeping that all with you, and it's so intense, it's just still present. But I say to myself, can we drop it? Can we finally just drop it? It's not so much I'm going to forgive that person, I'm going to feel great about them, I'm just going to feel happy. But just to drop it, because it does so much damage to yourself. Okay? Physically, mentally, your emotions, it's still all wrapped up in you. So there might be a time when something happened so long ago that you can finally say, well, I don't think they're walking around wondering about me and getting angry and keeping it there. You know what I'm saying? It's finally might be time to just let it go.
What's funny is you're probably completely right. But at the same time, that other person is probably carrying something about something that somebody else did to them 40 years ago that person is not. And it's, so there are a couple of things about this. One is what you mentioned brings to mind one of my favorite spiritual parables, which is the one about the two monks, the teacher and the student, who are out walking and come upon a stream that they need to cross. And there's this young woman who's standing by the stream, and she also needs to get across, but she's wearing this dress that can't get wet. And these two monks have taken a vow to never touch a female. And she says, can one of you carry me across this stream? The teacher and the student kind of look at each other. The teacher looks back at the girl and he says, yeah, I'll take you across. And he goes and he picks her up, and the three of them cross. The woman goes on her way, and the two monks go on their way, and the two monks are walking for about an hour or so. And the teacher can feel this angst coming off of the student, and finally, turns to the student. He's like, something? And the student says, I can't believe you broke our vow and carried that woman across the stream. And the teacher looks at the student and says, I put her down an hour ago. Why are you still carrying her? In a situation like that, yes, it's very easy from a physical standpoint to put something down, but we don't do so well psychologically. It does get to that point where it's like, well, isn't it just time to let this go? And often what we find is, yeah, it is, but we're not sure how. Isn't it time to put this down or let this go? That's an intellectual question, but you can't make a decision to just let something go. You have to get at the underlying root of it. That's really what this process is for, is to open that inquiry of saying, well, no, wait a minute. Where's this coming from? Because if there's something we're not letting go, there's something under there.
And it's so difficult to, can't you move on? Here's the big question. Can't I just work on myself because I can't change that other person. I might not even want to contact that person. I might want to talk it out and get rid of the anger and go to the source and get into it again and say, can we, quote, get together and, be in touch. It's more like you got to do something for yourself. That's what I think of.
Yeah. And you mentioned forgiveness, and forgiveness isn't for the other person. Forgiveness is for us. Forgiveness isn't saying what you did is okay. Forgiveness, as my teacher said a number of years ago, and I always quote him on this because I love it, he said, forgiveness is not all puppies and rainbows. It's much bitchier than that. I forgive you, not because what you did was okay, or I condone it. I forgive you so that I'm no longer tied to you because of this. You don't owe me anything for this. I do not require you to make me whole. That's for us.
Yes. Thank you.
Cheers. I did get one in the chat asking about someone who's new to this and having questions about, am I doing this right? I'm going to briefly move off the anger track just to cover that real quickly, because that is something that, I call my 101 session, my intro to mindfulness. I call it, am I doing this right? So I just very quickly want to touch on this. In this practice, as what we were just doing, there are elements of awareness and mindfulness and what's called ardency. Awareness simply being noticing what is here right now. Mindfulness often gets conflated with awareness. Mindfulness is really more about remembering what we have done in the past that has been skillful. In other words, alleviated our suffering. And seeing if we're doing that right now, or if maybe we need to make a change. And ardency is the process of doing this on an ongoing basis, using our discernment and saying, okay, is this working? How do I maintain this if it's working? What do I need to adjust if it's not? And some of the techniques that I was taking us through in the sitting are part of that. Noticing what is here, opening up an inquiry, and peeling away some of those layers that we've laid on over the years of assumption. If you imagine a 4-year-old and a 40-year-old watching the same fireworks display, you're going to see two very different reactions, right? The 4-year-old's going to be like, holy shit. They're probably not going to say holy shit. I don't know. Maybe they will say holy shit. The 40-year-old might be checking their watch. Okay. Peeling back some of those layers of, oh yeah, I know what that is. I know what that is. And really seeing what things are like as they unfold. Physical level, mental level, emotional level. And I call that intro session, when I'm going through the intro to mindfulness, I call that, am I doing this right? Because in the process of doing this practice, at any moment when we think to ourselves, am I doing this right? The answer is almost invariably yes. Because in that moment, even if a minute ago we were lost in some daydream, in that moment, simply by asking the question, we've come to the present moment with some awareness. We are exercising our mindfulness. What am I doing? Has this worked? Is it working now? And we're discerning the results. In that moment, simply by having asked the question, yeah, right now at this moment, I'm doing this right. In time, we simply develop more techniques that allow us to continue to do it, let's say, more right more often, a little more quickly each time. I like to think of it as being like a half-life. We get there a little faster each time and maintain it a little longer. So I hope that helps. Hi, Christine. Yes.
I'm very new to practicing meditation, a lot of anxiety and depression. And a lot of it has been brought up with COVID. And a lot of anger is around certain people and how they deal with COVID without, well, yeah, I'm sure you all know who I'm talking about. I realized that one of my biggest emotions in the past year. And I don't know why it's getting sort of a little worse right now, and it should be getting better with vaccines and people doing a little better, but still more anger is coming out lately. And if I wake up in the morning and I suddenly hear the news, anger has been like a big thing for me. When I think it's depression or I think it's anxiety, so much of it is anger. So I didn't know whether you were focusing that meditation on thinking about what we're angry about, or whether it was just our own meditation and whatever was coming up.
These are good. Thank you for that. These are great. When I'm teaching working with what is here now. So these sorts of sessions are a little more challenging for me because I'm focusing on an emotion that may not be present right now for folks who are listening. And I don't recommend generally that people try to dredge up a particular emotion simply for the sake of working with it. You can if you want. There's certainly nothing I can do to stop you. But the good thing is anything that I teach will work with anything, really. The same techniques that I use and teach to work with anxiety can work with any number of things. I mean, they may require little modifications here and there, but the reason the Buddhist teachings are still as deeply applicable and resonant as they were 2,500 years ago on the other side of the world is because they generalize to the entire spectrum of the human experience, regardless of what emotion or what we feel about a physical state, what we feel about a memory, whether we're working with a difficult, energized emotion like anger or anxiety or depression, or simply how we handle our relationships with other people. What you're mentioning about COVID and how other people are handling it, that's come up regularly on these over the last year. That's come up quite a few times.
I wished I had been here. No, I didn't talk to anybody about it. No one talked to me about it.
Yeah, that's come up several times, and my answer has been the same every time. It's been some form of, yeah, well, what we can work on here is our own suffering. We can barely control ourselves half the time. We sure as hell can't control somebody else. So if we find that other people are pushing our buttons, we're going to reduce our own suffering a hell of a lot more if we work on the programming behind those buttons instead of trying to make those people stop pushing them. So that's really what we're working with here, because that's all we can really control. Obviously, when I say control here, I don't mean control in the draining sense. I mean control in something that we can constructively work with. One thing I do want to mention, though, is you did say something about I should be feeling this other way instead of the way I've been feeling. I'd watch out for that. That's a real good area to say, oh, no, wait a minute. What is this? Maybe it's not what I expected, but it is what's here. And that might be worth saying, oh, so what's behind this then? What happens if I make some space for this? Listen to this voice at the table and see, oh, well, this is a surprise. Where is this coming from?
This should be?
Yeah. You mentioned something.
Oh, it's coming from people that I know. I should be happy. I should be happier.
Yeah.
I should be feeling thrilled that I got a vaccine. I mean, I am. That's not that. But yeah, it's a lot of people saying, what they're opening things up. They're doing, and I'm like, I don't care. I don't care if they're opening bars, whatever. Yeah, it's coming from other people. But then, yes, of course, I'm internalizing some of it myself. So I should be examining where else it's coming from other than the people in my life who are not as anxious, and I'm kind of an intense artistic person. So.
Yeah, there's a lot there. We can talk about this more offline if you like, because it sounds like there's a lot there, much of which deeply resonates. But yes, as sort of a bottom line, just for now, this is stuff where we need to look at even beyond, oh, I'm internalizing this. Okay, what's behind that? What is the need, or what is the fear, or what you're latching onto it, which, I mean, we all do, of course. That's baked into our DNA. This is evolutionary stuff. So I'm not saying you shouldn't be. I'm saying, oh, here's what I'm noticing is happening, this internalization. Where's it coming from? Again, what's the motivation? Even if it's subconscious, we're just kind of opening to it. What am I thinking I'm going to get out of this? Even if it's just a feeling of, I want to belong. I want to be loved. Even if it's something that simple. Getting to those sorts of roots of it.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'll close with this one because I got one in the chat. What about people who you know, people in your family, for example, who have anger issues but don't think they do, but they really do, and other people are affected, closed off to changing, and people who think they know better than everyone else? Yeah. Gee, I've never had anybody like that in my life. I've certainly never been that person. This is one that comes up fairly often, not just in these sessions, privately as well. This is the kind of thing that is difficult to answer in a group session because they tend to be, every situation is so different. I mean, every single person is so different. But then when you have someone with a relationship with another person and all of the layers of complexity and the uniqueness that goes along with that, it's kind of hard to give a generalized answer. What I will say is sometimes we may have to set boundaries up to and including removing ourselves physically from someone's proximity. We can only work on our aspect, our side, our half of the dance. I don't know if this completely applies right here. I don't mean to put this in a war motif, but one of my very favorite quotes, it's really dark, but one of my favorite quotes is, the quickest way to end a war is to lose it. And the reason I like that quote isn't because I want to use a war motif or because I want to talk about losing, or I like it because it drives home the point that we cannot control the other side. We cannot control the other person. What I always come to in this practice is the bottom line question. The only thing that the Buddha himself was concerned with and taught, which was how to alleviate suffering. How to alleviate suffering. Not pain. Pain's that thing we don't have a choice about. Suffering is what happens when we don't deal with pain skillfully. Like, say, someone who had a traumatic experience and spent 8 years denying it while in school for social psychology. What? Okay. Caused myself a lot of suffering by trying to avoid my pain. What can we do to decrease our suffering? And am I doing that right now? And if I am, how do I maintain this and improve it? And if I'm not, what do I need to change? And again, this is where our awareness and our mindfulness and our discernment come in. Here's that word again, decide, to cut off. We may have to make some difficult decisions. And we may not have an optimal one available to us. But the practice allows us to develop the clear seeing to pick the best available option. Make the best possible decision. And even afterwards, review. Say, okay, how is that decision working? Do I need to make an adjustment? And that then becomes part of our mindfulness practice. Another thing that we have done and looked at the results. In Buddhism, this is karma, cause and effect. And this is how we create our lives for ourselves. This is the bed that we make for ourselves. So we want to do it skillfully. I want to be skillful about it. We're a couple of minutes over, so I am going to leave it there. Always feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or thoughts. Thank you so much for joining me today.